Welcome to Metanoia Mon Amour, a series of meetings created by Nicola Scotta Thompson, my human clone. Throughout this series, and while touching on passages from his eponymous book, we will explore various contemporary and ancient themes, thus paying tribute to the lost art of conversation. In this episode, Catalina González Arbol, sexologist, psychonaut, digital nomad, and Catita to her friends, is a true living gem of modernity. Sensible, reflective, and majestic, she spends the day empowering women and raising awareness among men. Her genuine laughter is very contagious. Welcome, Catalina González Arbol. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Arbol, with an accent on the O.
This is prepared. He told me just before we started, how is this Arbol with an accent on the O? Where is the last name from? What is its origin?
No one knows for sure.
Done.
Yes, it's really rare. My grandfather was black, like Afro.
Afro-descendant.
Yes, he said he was from Uruguay, but no one really knows. Where from?
Like most African Americans, they don't know.
Yes, at some point, they entered Argentina. Their names were changed on the documents. They were given whatever names they wanted.
Sure.
So, it stayed there.
So the other day, it was interesting because one has the conviction that we are going to share some mate here with. Remember, Catita. You grab it from here and move it like this. Perfect, go ahead. One has a commission, for example. I am Thompson, but there is Thompson with a P and Thompson without a P. So I say, well, the guy at customs put the P or didn't put it. And strange last names were written phonetically and they would write anything. And you know it can't be that there were cases like that. But the other day I listened to an amazing podcast about the history of migrations, and at least in the records at the customs in New York, the last names were correct, because in the end they asked the people to write it down. I mean, is this the last name of the person coming? It's not like I just put anything there. What happens is that families in the ghettos, the Italians, the Poles, whoever they were, especially the first ones who were the Irish, had surnames that sounded unusual to Western ears. Families decided to simplify their last names, modifying them so that society could understand them. And it wasn't the people at customs, it was the family itself. That's why you have variations within surnames in the same city, as I said, Thompson with a P or without a P and so on.
And it also depended on who who the person was, if you were black in the 30s, or if you were a white, silver, depending on how you entered.
It could be, but a little of what the records show is that, I don't know if you were a slave directly, your owner would give you the label, but if you were a migrant from the lower class, it doesn't matter. The origin, whether you were from the lower class or from the upper class, it was the same back then. There weren't many migrant Milos. In any case, there were people, entertainers, or businessmen who came to see what was happening with their capital. Migrants, by definition, were people who came with one hand behind and the other in front. But then there's Arbol, and it's written like Arbol but without the L. There are people in my family who write it with an accent on the O, and there are others who write it without. It's kind of a strange thing. Nobody knows where it comes from. And it drives me crazy because
those who do not know their history are a whole topic.
It's a nice pending matter, and you, as a person who doesn't need me to confirm this, curious and respectful of the past, I'm sure you will. Contrary, put on your detective hat and investigate it, then let us know. Thanks for the invitation, a pleasure. Pussy power. I wanted to mention it. I have it here in the notes as an intro, because I heard Catita the other day on a podcast that a mutual friend, Agus Rizzo, did. And by the way, we send him a greeting on Rock and Law.
We give a shout out to Rock and Law.
High-quality documentary, high-quality podcast that has been around for years. It's for Spotify, so it's audio, but Agus does it very well. He is a great interviewer who uses few words but is very precise. And at one point you said, I don't know if he or you mentioned the pussy power, and I have. But, why? Father, wait. I didn't introduce you, Catita. Catita is a sexologist. She's a psychologist, a sexologist. Now it makes a little more sense about the pussy power. I wanted to start with, I'm going to grab my machete. I wanted to start with now we're going to talk about the topic of sexology and such, and then we're going to move on to other topics. But no, that's fine. Let's get started with. It's a bit. I have to remember that I need to speak into the microphone. Obviously. I imagine you are already quite used to, if not fed up with, people identifying you directly with your profession or with that label of sexology, whether on camera or off. In a society where we are quite a lot, there is a lot of porn on one side, but also a lot of puritanism. The Americans are the epitome of that, right? Not of. We are like children when it comes to our relationship with sex, our relationship with our sexuality, our relationship with the sexuality of others, and how we judge. And it clearly catches your attention, doesn't it?
It's quite an experiment, to say the least.
It's quite an experiment, to say the least. I imagine you already have, almost by default, a definition of what sexology is and why. Let's start there. Let's get rid of the doubt or away. To get to know you a little better, and then we can dive into the conversation and the exchange of ideas. What is sexology, Catita, and how did you come to decide to dedicate your life or part of your professional life to that discipline?
Can I say any kind of word? Can I curse? Is it allowed? The bitch of the parrot, that's it. I already gave you the idea, I'll give you one. Good. Well, I studied psychology, which was like the alternative to, well, I have to study. For a while, because my father, family mandate. And I said, well, if I have to study for at least 4 years, something that interests me somewhat while you talk, I'll have my mate. Perfect. And then I'll pass you another one, sure. And I studied psychology and wasn't sure if I wanted to pursue that. I didn't want to be a psychologist. The truth is, I didn't want to do it. But I really enjoyed the program while studying it. I thought, well, if I have to study, I will study something that I find fun. I have no idea what I'm going to do afterward. And then, well, I am the daughter of a diplomat, so I traveled my whole life. I finished high school in Washington. They quickly go over which countries and places I have been to. Let's see, I was born in Buenos Aires, then we went to Paraguay. My dad is from Paraguay, then we went to Chile. After that, we went to Italy, to Milan. Then I lived in Barcelona and Washington. Boo, you ended up in Washington. I ended up in Washington during some key years of my life, from 16 to 18, which was quite a turbulent time, with all the pros and cons that come with migrating.
Yes, in addition to a contrast, because you came from all the Latin countries, or Latin Hispanic Atlantic.
We were coming from Buenos Aires, yes, from Buenos Aires to Washington. Of course, a Catholic school here. For example, a small, private, Catholic school. And we moved to a suburb of Washington, Maryland, in Portland, no, not Portland, in Maryland. And we lived there, of course, a public school in the suburbs. We were $500 per year. It was
let's say from the head of the mouse to the tail of the lion, because it wasn't the tail of the mouse, it was the tail of the lion. Contrast everywhere.
So, well, to avoid going off on a tangent, I basically found a psychology course over in Washington. I got hooked on psychology, came back here, and said, I'm going to study psychology. Good. I finished my degree. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with my life, so I moved to Barcelona. I was there for the last 7 years. In fact, I just returned to Buenos Aires about 6 months ago, and I fell in love with sexology. In fact, I had a very key moment in my life at 16, when I started having my first sexual relationships with a guy, and that dude told me something about my own vulva. I mean, about my pussy, which is something I also talk about in the podcast with Agus. No, there are certain moments in a person's life that leave a mark on you for better or for worse. It doesn't matter. They leave a mark. Yes, yes, yes. And that was one of those moments. When this guy told me, like, you have a mole, right, on your vulva, and I was like. And in that moment, I realized that I had never looked at myself. I had never done the big mirror thing. What is something that we women who have a vulva experience very differently from men who have a penis? It is all very internal. And so, even to see a part of our body, we need an external element. I mean, the idea that in order to see something of myself, I need something external is already strong.
Yes, yes, yes. It's something emblematic because, in any case, we all go through that with the anus. And the butt, it happens to all of us. But let's talk about the penis now that I'm with a sexologist. I like the term small parenthesis because while listening to Katie, she corrected me. I have a 3.5-year-old daughter, as I just mentioned. And they told us we have to call it a vagina, not choo-chee, or poopy, or
Vagina. Vagina is not visible. The vagina is the vaginal canal.
Sure.
What we see externally is the vulva, which includes everything, let's say, right.
Which is also a much more beautiful word, much rounder, poetic, and sonorous.
And if we delve into the etymology of words, I mean, the word vagina comes from vina.
What?
What is a vina? It's something that is used to wrap another thing.
Of course, it's not even the thing itself.
It's not even the thing itself. What does it have to do with how we live? How has it?
It is a good metaphor for
No, of female sexuality in itself, where it existed and exists for some people. Specifically, we can see it in porn, where a female body, female pleasure is not present. The woman is there to satisfy male enjoyment. So, our existence has been. Well, we were born from the rib, right?
we already started off on the wrong foot.
Vagina. Sheath. It all comes from the same place. So, I think a big part of starting to break away from those things is to begin using language that is appropriate, right?
I ask you, probably, sexuality or sexology will be the main focus of the conversation, but we can branch out a little. I ask you because maybe you have researched it more than I have. I understand that prior to, for example, the civilizational eras, where these narratives are constructed that later culminate in the Bible or the Quran or whatever, prior to this conception. I don't like the word patriarchal, but let's say machista.
We can call the sun.
The sun. Are you talking about the man?
I think.
I'll tell you later.
I'll let you complete the question.
No, I mean, it talks about eras, depending on the region as well. It doesn't mean it's a one-size-fits-all situation. The global issue is something quite novel. But the topic of matriarchal social systems. And they talk about times, very past times, where the paradigm was matriarchal, which would also need to be defined what that means and such. Have you done any?
Yes, Catita. I have some information. There was a book in college that a sociology professor brought to me called The Myth of the Goddess, which has a whole investigation about the statuettes that were found. They were discovered by an anthropologist named Maria Gimbutas. And obviously, like in any science, within anthropology, there is also a very patriarchal perspective, right? Who are the ones who have the voice and who are the ones who have the knowledge? Maria found some figurines that, like the first figurines, are the oldest that have been discovered. Location: Europe. Yes, Europe. I don't want to throw out too many specific names because I don't want to make unfounded claims, but what I'm sure of is that I prefer the European continent of civilizations. Pre-Indo-European, right. Where figurines of women were found, right. It's like they have this shape, right, like big breasts and wide hips. And they are like images of fat women, right, with the shape of Mother Earth, right, like very round, voluptuous. And they found those figurines and realized that, of course, those civilizations worshipped the moon. And there, within the history of civilization, there is a change that is what you are referring to. I don't like to talk about patriarchy or matriarchy. I prefer to talk about what was worshipped, the sun and the moon.
To the feminine and to the masculine.
Exactly. And it actually all comes from the mystery. Because I imagine in my fantasy, the first people, right, like they come, a woman gets pregnant, right. You engage in a sexual act. The woman becomes pregnant, and suddenly a human being grows in her belly, coming every 28 to 35 days, more or less like the lunar cycle, right. The moon, I say, controls the fluids of the earth, controls the tides, controls our blood, our water. Yes, yes. So, all of that. It had an incredible value back then, didn't it? It was almost miraculous, wasn't it? And the moon was worshipped. And at some point in history, which is also related to the Greeks, the sun began to be worshipped.
Yes, in reality, the Greeks are a franchise of the Egyptians. And the Egyptians, which I also discuss in the book, are a franchise in turn, actually. I don't want to go off on a tangent right now, but there are the gymnosophists who come from the mushrooms of India regarding this issue of the sun and the moon. Let's say that in reality, when it comes to geometry and measuring the earth, the Greeks. Somehow, this is something I heard Elon Musk say. Now back to Elon Musk. Recently, of course, the Greeks weren't great. Content creators, the thing is, they were the type of people who liked to write and archive things, document. The real action might have happened elsewhere, but those who left the evidence, dude. With affection, I have affection for them, the Greeks, long live the Greeks, but they are not, they have claimed it, in fact. Pita, which is the Agora of Pita, is a school, not a person, and this also happens with Hermes Trismegistus. There are a lot of figures that are considered individuals. In reality, they were schools, and the school of Pita from the Agora of Pita consisted of all Greek thinkers who had traveled at some point, or the earliest had traveled to Egypt and encountered the wisdom of the monks or of the religious figures who accompanied the pharaoh and so on. I don't want to go overboard, but that's where it comes from. But anyway, let's go back to.
In the end, it's all about, and I believe it has a lot to do with your book, not falling into either one. It is not the sun, or the moon, nor is it the masculine, or the feminine. It has to do with an integration of both energies. The balance between both forces where it is not necessary for us to return to matriarchy and worship women, and for women to take the lead. No, the masculine and the feminine have their strengths within what they are and they complement each other. The idea is not to differentiate ourselves.
To divide, but to differentiate ourselves. In order to take advantage of our differences and complement each other. To reconnect, to empower ourselves. To celebrate ourselves. I throw out a thought that could be a detail or something fundamental. I don't know, because I don't really know. I think no one knows. During my travels in India in 2016, which I took as a personal mission to document cultures on the verge of extinction, I encountered a tribe in the northeast of India, in Assam, which is actually 7 very small provinces that are intertwined, meaning they are surrounded by what would be Tibet, Bhutan, to the north, and Burma to the east. Nepal is to the west, and below it is Bangladesh, which is like an appendix of the triangle that is India. In Assam and Meghalaya, which are 2 of these provinces, were the Doni Polo. And the Doni Polo is the mother sun and the mother moon. The mother sun and the mother moon. Of course. Just like the frontal lobe in the brain, the cultural layer they have nowadays, is a Hindu layer. So the Zahari Velanacito depends on whether you are married to red, if you are not married to other colors, whatever it may be. There is a crossing, there is an amalgamation, or a colonization of one culture over the other, but they maintain. Just as it happens with Afro-descendants or with Amerindians, where you see the Virgin of Guadalupe, in reality, the Virgin of Guadalupe is an Amerindian goddess. Well, the same thing happens here. And what's interesting, and I don't have much more to say, but it's true, the social system is matriarchal. Can you believe it? It's Mother Moon, Mother Sun. And men have more than one wife. Men are polygamous, they have more than one wives, not concubines, wives who become very good friends. I knew 2 old ladies who had been the wives of a man who was no longer around, but they were still there, and were like sisters, 90 years old. So, the mangoes are handled by the women. And you inherit your last name from your mother. So, it's a matriarchy, but with poly super crazy, with mother sun, father moon. I'm throwing it out there as that human variability, right?
Yes. It's similar to what usually happens in patriarchal societies, right? Like the one we live in, where I say it's called patriarchal because of what is valued, right? The value is in everything that has to do with the masculine. Masculine energy is related to doing, penetrating, and moving forward, which is great. However, if we become polarized in that energy, there is an excess of the masculine that doesn't complement or balance out because there is no feminine energy, and it all goes to hell. There is an exacerbation of the masculine, and it is valued. The masculine, right? Going to work, bringing money home, being productive, right? And everything related to the feminine is devalued. So, the problem is not what each pole means and what is present in each, but rather what is valued in society. Because if staying home to take care of your children were valued, right?
It would also be a deviation from that balance we are discussing, that we are celebrating or promoting, which is neither one thing nor the other. I was listening to you and thinking, damn, and in the book I talk a lot about the dichotomy, or rather, the relationship between competition and collaboration. One could say competition is masculine and collaboration is feminine. It doesn't need explaining, one is intuitive. My thesis is that competition is not bad, competition is not bad. But we are behind, there is a lot of competition, there are a lot of sharks, and there are many little fish that have to put on the shark disguise so they don't get eaten, at least as a sort of umbrella. I talk about dolphins as a third category, not for a sexual category, but as a metaphorical theme that we need, in order to balance competition with collaboration, we need men and women who have strength, who have empathy. That is, who are sensitive and pragmatic. That's why the dolphin is just as big, a size similar to that of the shark. It's warm-blooded, it has a smile on its face. Metaphors, right, metaphors. But it doesn't have to do with the male or the female, or the man or the woman. It has to do with to balance the days, to balance the different impulses in the dialogue.
And that both the masculine and the feminine can exist within a person. In other words, it's not that just because you are a man, or because you were born a man, you have more to do with masculine energy than with feminine energy. Of course, because this is masculine, and so what comes out first will be everything related to masculine energy. But the idea is that those two forces within the same person should also be balanced. So, where there is a balance between doing, between producing, and resting, right? There should be a balance between those two forces, right? Everything related to the feminine and the masculine. So, There are a lot of men with a lot of feminine energy, right? And a lot of women with a lot of masculine energy, which is what happens in these societies, right? Where there can be women who are women because they were born women, but are hyper-masculinized, right? Of course. I mean, totally disconnected from their feelings, from their emotions. They spend all day working, right? Like, again, because if not, they are not valued in a society where what is valued is the masculine. So we all tend to gravitate towards what is socially valued, which, fortunately, is changing, but what is valued is more masculine than feminine.
Here I am getting into some tricky territory, but well, it's all good. Everything related to sexuality. We still haven't gotten into it. I was tempted to say, listen to the podcast with Agus, and there Katie talks a lot about therapies, approaches, group work, individual work, and what obstacles we have. Again, I don't know if, because I have so much to ask you, I don't know if I should direct them to that podcast and then come back to this one, or paraphrase it. But, before that, I wanted to. Let's go this way. With this about vigil, it's changing, right? The paradigm is. The feeling I have, metaphorically, is like a kind of. Well, something I learned not long ago. In the last decade, my best childhood friend told me, whom I see every now and then because he lives abroad. I was, it's not that women or femininity need to empower themselves again. It's great because we were talking about the exaggerations, the deviations, or the distortions of this kind of dam that existed, of containment and repression of a lot of expulsions that, when released, because of the paradigm shift, the Me Too movement, the empowerment of women, let's say, feminism in full swing, my perspective was like a kind of gate that opens, and of course, all the water comes out.
It becomes polarized, right?
And it polarizes. And she tells me, hold on, today it's my life what I'm going to say, but 10 years ago it blew my mind that it's not just about empowering women, it's also about raising awareness among men. In other words, there are two tasks that they complement each other or go hand in hand. They need to empower themselves. I mean, their work. I say, what they need to do now is to empower themselves and then, in any case, learn to coexist, to find balance with the masculine. And we need to learn to become more sensitive and also to recover or revitalize, celebrate our feminine aspect, 2. Relax a little, which is what the male has, I don't know what. Of course, I think we tend to.
I see. No, because when one talks about patriarchy, everything in the atmosphere automatically becomes tense. But what we often forget is that patriarchy messes us up, both women and men. Everything related to gender, which I differentiate between, and I delve into very controversial areas. But I can handle it. Sex is your genitality. In other words, you are born with a vulva or with a penis. There are variations, right? There are intersex people. I won't get into that, but they are chromosomal variations, right? And it's a very small percentage of the population. What usually happens is that you are born either with a vagina or with a penis. What's the issue? Genitality itself, sex itself, should not be a problem. The problem is gender. What is it? Everything that culture imposes on that sex. It is cultural. It has nothing to do with our bodies. So, does that mean that in this society I am born a woman? I have a vulva. And then, what does that mean? From the moment I was in my mother's womb, they would say, we are going to paint the room pink and hopefully she will be a teacher and hopefully she will have children. I take this to the extreme so that it is understood. Fortunately, things are changing, but it is true that unfortunately, your sex today, sex and gender are completely intertwined. What radical feminism demands, and what feminism in general demands, is the abolition of gender. What it means is that you being born with a penis and me being born with a vulva should not condition me in society regarding what I can or cannot do, right? Total. Clear.
Let me add something. No, I might be interrupting because here I'm adding a variable to the matter that I've been thinking about for a long time. Throughout the phenomenon that involves the empowerment of women and the sensitization of men, I add the variable of resentment or anger. Fear, so that's the phenomenon. Now, what happens when we experience the conflicts and controversies we are currently living through? In the end, it is about distancing ourselves from balance, moving away from reconnection, and not being too pragmatic in trying to return, but rather remaining entrenched. What happens when I identify as sapiosexual or fluid? And if you don't treat me as I perceive myself, I get offended and accuse you? We get into a controversial topic because it relates to what is considered progressive today. So, what do we do? Should we go in now? Should we leave?
I don't know. Again, I prefer to stick with the topic of patriarchy. What are the things we want versus the things we want to fight against? It's like, what do we do? Neither feminists fight against men, nor do macho men fight against women. In the example, the common enemy is the patriarchy. It is the same system that forces me, as a woman, to submit to men or to stay at home taking care of my children, again, taking it to the extreme. Or that as a man, it gives you the right to. Whistling at me in the street, for example, and the cultural things we have, and it's the same enemy that makes you, who wants to stay home to take care of your children, or that something affects you in your group of friends, unable to talk about it because otherwise they call you a faggot. I mean, it's the same enemy, and we have that in common, and it harms both of us, and that gets lost.
Exactly. I think it is precisely in the resentment, the hatred. Well, let's see. There are women who are legitimately angry because they were abused as girls, and they are not few. I mean, one understands where that fury, that anger, that rejection, that distrust, and that generalization of the other, of men, comes from. Sorry, I want to interrupt. There is also something about it's like the slaves when they asked for their liberation. They didn't go to the guys and say, "Hey, guys, what do you think if suddenly we are free?"
Totally, because I mean until you shout and make noise, no one hears you, right?
Oh, duh.
So, I also ask the submissive for a certain serenity in their liberation.
No, but not to Rosa Parks or not to the girls from Me Too even less than 10 years ago. But no, this is a question. It's not rhetorical. We are not at a point where we can just stop with this, and that's it. We are no longer.
It depends on where here in Argentina, maybe yes. And in Ghana where they mutilate the clitoris, maybe not.
Not in India.
One.
Also, if you want, I can talk to you about femininity in India, because there's so much to learn. Men, I would say men. Easterners have much to learn from Westerners regarding sensitivity and femininity. I am generalizing, and Western women have much to learn from the femininity of Eastern women, and I am also generalizing. I refer to the other day as an epitome, a perfect example, the white seal of Greenpeace, Elliot Page, formerly known as Ellen Page, at the MTV fucking awards, or one of those, telling the microphone to the millions of viewers that trans people do not have a voice in public life. What's happening? The madness of a woman who now identifies or has always identified as a man who has taken steps in reality to Let's express that in your body, in your behavior, and in your social life, which is famous for being an actor. You enslaved me for being an actor, and if it's confusing, with a microphone, talking to millions of people saying that you have no voice, do you understand the delirium there? It's like when you say, hold on, let me down, because I understand what you're saying. That's what I was saying. I remember 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I told my friends, guys, we're going to have to endure a period where they're going to come at us with everything because the doors have been opened and the river needs to flow. It has to flow, but we also have to keep the cart from stopping. Instead, all the waters need to settle, and we have to find that balance again. It also takes effort to find that balance. It's not simply that. Because if you let things happen, those who take pleasure in causing harm to others, sadism is ubiquitous, will continue. It's like a kind of power shift. We're going to swing from one extreme to the other. The pendulum eventually has to reach equilibrium at some point. It should. We're a bit on the same page. Totally. I think it's a debate that would take us weeks and is super interesting, but I think it's good to return to the focus, which is that neither men nor women want to be told what to do. It's about returning a bit to consciousness, which for me, sexuality, returning a bit to the first question, was and is a first path toward a more conscious life, right?
For me, sexuality was about starting to ask myself how I like to have sex, for example, and from that question, I began to ask myself a whole bunch of other things, right? Of course. What is my pleasure? How is my pleasure? What kind of life do I want to lead? And from there, a whole path begins to open up that has to do with awareness. So, we come back to the same point. Neither men, nor women, nor trans individuals, nor any person, call them whatever you want, wants to be told what to do, right? And the search and the path is inward. So, when someone comes to me and says, you have to go to work and provide for your children, or you have to present yourself as such, I mean, nobody likes that. It's about going back a bit to the idea that as people, I shouldn't have to call myself a woman. I mean, my designation of what I am shouldn't have to. How can I explain it? That the way I am called doesn't have to mean anything on a social level. Of course, I mean that I introduce myself as Katie. And they don't bring in the collective imagery. She's a woman, so this, and that, right?
Because then we are training ourselves. I think it's like the algorithm, like Chachi and Pili, who are training it here too. We are all involved, and there have been many changes in training the algorithm. Yes, because, let's say, an exaggerated symptom of this is the sensitive man, the man who has always been or who, let's say, would not represent the macho, misogynistic, patriarchal type that exists. We all go around with our own levels. It's good that I don't want to offend anyone. Let's say I have to say that I talk with whoever I want. I don't want to offend you. Of course, that happens. It's not very feminine in the sense that suddenly women are with the machete under their arm, and the guys are all like, what do I do? Do I open the door for her? Do I say something? It's not like the idea. No. The first time I heard this conversation, which I later had, was between look at that. Gustavo Cerati and Pirinado who were talking. No. And well, all of this, let's say, you can't say anything. But from the perspective of men who were celebrating that and being mindful of how to handle the situation, it wasn't like saying, hey, this sucks. Being macho is no longer in style. No, quite the opposite.
Yes, there is something about the I mean. When we talk a lot about, we tend to apply the same things from one sex or the other, right? Like, for example, objectifying a man, right? There's a lot of talk about the objectification of women, right? And suddenly, we women start objectifying men, right? Oh, like, how good looking is this guy, right? That's how we objectify him. And then one says, hey, if that were done to a woman, that wouldn't be good, right? But there's something.
See how you get out of it.
Isn't there something about the system that endorses certain behaviors? And behind the objectification of a man is not the same story as the objectification of a woman. Let me explain. You can say, no, the girls are crazy, right? Because suddenly they went to the other side and not talking about you, I'm talking about a person. But for me, I mean, nowadays they still kill one woman a day. Because she is a woman, the example of Catalina, for instance, who was killed by her best friend at 21, right? So our reality, it's not the same. I mean, sometimes I'm afraid to go out on the street. I mean, you and I, or rather, I and you, do not walk down the street with the same ease at 2 in the morning.
No, true.
Why? Because with the basic example that you can rape someone, I cannot. And there is something about the phallus. Yes, right, yes. So it's not the same. I mean, there is a whole system and a history in which the body of women and women have been subjected for a long time. That doesn't mean we have to victimize ourselves and constantly be in the position of the victim. But it is not the same to objectify a man as it is to objectify a woman. Because there is a whole history behind it, and you might say, wow, those women are crazy now. And yes, because I am afraid to go out on the street.
Of course, one might say that the objectification of women can stem from a matter of bravado or whatever, leading to abuse. Or, let's say, objectifying a man, well, that's a compliment. I take it, and what I'm going to say is an addition to what you're saying. It's not a contradiction to what you're saying. And besides, everything would need to be checked. But the other day I saw a documentary called The Red Pill, La Píldora Roja. There must be more than one documentary with that name for obvious reasons referencing the Matrix movie and such. But in this case, it's a feminist from the U.S. who records herself. In other words, the main thread of the documentary is her speaking to the camera and her process, starting out as a feminist. Power, what I wanted to do was somehow document the men's rights movement, the movement of men in the United States, which you see, Americans have a movement for everything, including for men who have been objectified and I will say, of course, I mean that. What was I going to say? What nonsense, you see, that deconstruction is something that, yes, constant. But well, the other day someone told me that saying little vanilla is good because if you call me little gay, you say little vanilla and it sounds like,
what mean, Mariquita?
Now we'll really get into it. Let's get to it. In reality, what do I mean? Nothing that has to do with sucking dicks or anything related to sexuality of someone who likes the same sex. Nothing in my case, coward, other things, but it's a shame that, of course, for a coward to say homosexual as a synonym for faggot must be frustrating for the homosexual. So I take it and try not to repeat it, even though I have the algorithm. What I'm getting at in this documentary, Red Pill, is that this girl is transitioning away from being a feminist and towards understanding because of statistics and studies. This sociological, anthropological, and statistical data are presented and communicated by her, confirming that the percentage of abuse, understood as verbal abuse, psychological abuse, throwing an ashtray at your head, rape, and the entire spectrum of abuse is significant. It was clearly a 50-50 split, men and women, of those who receive it. Exactly. There is a widespread idea that it is much more expensive.
But it's right there. Sorry, I'm going to correct you, Nico. Yes, please, this is an interview to correct you. That's why I asked you, who receives that abuse? The keen rise in who commits it.
No, but it's 50-50 of men and women who do it. Do they abuse? Yes. In the case of women, precisely because a guy who weighs twice as much, they can't grab and rape. But there is nothing that surpasses that kind of crime. It's clear there are differences. But in terms of day-to-day life, in the everyday domestic sphere, the man who receives. This famous guy goes from being called an idiot to a loser. They throw an ashtray at his head, and he spends his time dodging ashtrays. Meanwhile, the woman sometimes hits the kid and hits him too, and he takes it. He won't report it because if he does, saying that a woman is hitting him, they'll just laugh at him. Moreover, another chapter of this documentary, it was about the fact that if a woman accuses a man of abuse today, whether it's abusing the kid or whatever, you're guilty until you prove otherwise, and they ruin your life even if you're innocent and it's proven 10 years later that you are innocent. In other words, I insist. I am not denying the numbers of one woman dying per day at the hands of a man in a violent manner. Doesn't negate the other, but let's say the everyday abuse in every sense. And it doesn't surprise me if you stop to think talking about balances and macro things, statistics. It should be 50-50 at some point. We should check this figure and see with people, society, and everything.
I agree. And I go back to the same point, right? It's not about men or women. It's about the patriarchy. It's about the system that abuses us all. To you, to me, to the trans, to everyone, I say, as human beings, we are told we are socially conditioned in what we should do.
Socially, I ask you a question because this way, let's say, there must be a lot of content about this, but I want to take advantage of you to draw out things that are complementing the core of the conversation of the dialectic. Social, beyond the instinctive. I don't know if you have any reading or have received. But when I was listening to you, I thought about the apes. Apes are the large monkeys, right? Orangutans, chimpanzees, bonobos, and gorillas, basically. We share almost all of our DNA with them. We are all social, hierarchical creatures where there is patriarchies in some way, and also matriarchies, meaning there are alpha females, alpha males. There are hierarchies down there.
Do monkeys have culture?
Monkeys have the rudiments of a social structure where, due to physical size and strength, there is a kind of male or male dominance. However, the alpha female also has her entourage of beta females, and they dominate, even dominating the alpha male and the betas, whether it's how much more they groom them, how much more sex they have with them, or how much more of this or that, each one with what they have, with receptivity, with penetration, whatever it may be. But let's say women or researchers like Jane Goodall and others have realized that there is a lot we tend to see. We are what I said. I mentioned bonobos, chimpanzees, orangutans, and gorillas, as well as Homo sapiens sapiens, humans who, by the way, Catita, I don't know if you knew, but there were a total of 21 species of Homo, or of Homo, let's say, Homo afarensis australopithecus. It was previously thought that they were an evolutionary chain, and they coexisted at the same time 9 species, that is, the record known so far, the record up to now, 9 species. Today, and for a long time now, we are only the sapiens sapiens, the ones who know that they know, but that is an exception. Throughout the long history of humanity, at least one more was around, and today we can say that there are 4 more around, but well, they are much further down. But the rudiments are there. It's like saying the brain. It's not that there are no creatures with brains and suddenly such a human. Our brain is the epitome, especially due to the frontal lobe, the hyperdeveloped part of. Let's say it is an evolutionary sequence of brains that share a lot of biochemical similarities with the brains of other species. What is my question? What am I getting at? How much of the patriarchy is not related to the biological instincts of genes, but rather to primitive social structures? In other words, how does this bring us closer to understanding how societies are so structured in other primates?
I think we return to value. The task itself is neither bad nor good. In other words, if we lived in a society that valued taking care of children and staying at home, I return to the idea that the problem is not what is done, but the value we give it as a society.
But we did not have that value until recently when women empowered themselves and had the opportunity to study. I am not back. I am trying to think about how things were. Because the family, as a family unit, father and mother and 2 children, was an institution that is a human institution, a human creation. Families do not exist in nature. There are clans. You have an alpha male with betas. The betas mate when they can. The alpha male has concubines, and the concubines share the upbringing of the children. I have lived in villages in India that function this way. Exactly. Children are raised among themselves. Read Aldous Huxley's book, Island, which talks about this, about the clans. On the island, it is a social experiment because it is an island they can control. Like they say, what would the perfect society look like? Or as perfect as possible among these applications, these modifications to which we know the people on the island lived in clan format. So you have uncles, or not, or friends, groups, where you have all the children growing up together, and then they go spending all day at Aunt Peepa's house, and then they go to Uncle Juan's house and play in the garden. In other words, it's a bit like what happens with our hominid brothers, especially the apes. The family is a convention, it is an institution that appears in, well, probably in the time when we became sedentary with agriculture and such, because then you have precisely, it is a division of tasks, both highly valued.
Family on marriage.
One, the man who goes, both things, because it was like or I see it as a unit. You have a family member who goes to get the meat, the food, whatever to get the sustenance, and the other member stays to cook and take care of the children and so on. Let's say both have the same value. It is extremely important for the guy to have the peace of mind that the woman is at home with the kids, which in the context of a clan where there were other women, maybe 2 or 3 men, because they are older or they are teenagers who are not married yet or whatever, are not in that task of going to get the food. I mean, if you think about it, the family unit and McClan, don't even get me started, but the family unit is super, it's valuable from both positions. It doesn't matter because today the man stays at home and the woman goes to work. In that sense, it is indifferent. It should be indifferent.
Division of tasks, yes.
The division of tasks can be seasonal. This year I'll be who has a better job or who has more passion.
We discussed the power to decide.
There it goes, there it goes. That would be like 3.0, right? The family 3.0, where you just... Family can be 2 men and children. It can be 2 women and children. It can be the grandmother, the aunt, and a cousin taking care of the nephews. Big group of friends, big group of friends. That. Among them are single fathers and mothers, and there are also children in the group. For me, this is where people go to seek sustenance, and there are people who take care of the ranch. I mean, I don't know if we don't value the people who stay to take care of the ranch. What we do value is the possibility of choice. What you're saying is not that a woman has to stay home and a man has to go out. The issue is, if you stay at home, what happens when the other person goes out to work?
In the world we live in today, right? Because before, in this situation of, hey, I'm going to get married, you stay in the cave with the kids. I mean, what was achieved? The capital was food. Yes, we can't transpose this to today because capital is money, so if I stay at home and you go out to work, the one who has power over the money is you. And so I might stay at home and not have, and then an economic dependency starts to develop, which was the case for all the women of the 60s.
Sheila.
And then I no longer have the possibility.
But the legislation has ensured that you, as a woman, of a guy who is going to make money, have the right to access that money in the bank account. Now, let's say when they separate, the assets are divided. That has been getting sorted out. It depends. We're not, I believe we are, in a kind of convulsion towards something better than what we have been experiencing. I am very optimistic about the suffering caused by mandates, by what we are told to do, and that the path is inward towards consciousness and towards asking ourselves questions about what we like, what we want, and what we do not like. It is important to step away from the demands of the mandate regarding what we should do, what we have to do, which causes us so much suffering from the superego. Yes, it's good. It's good to wrap up. Let's close with the following. You have a story about that, because since we are here, let's delve a little into yours. Let's see this idea of patriarchy, matriarchy, the feminine, the masculine, the Apollonian, and the Dionysian. Tell us about that, Start by describing the word and then your activity.
Well, based on this experience I shared about my own sexuality, I started to realize that we have very little information about our sexuality. I talk about sexuality because it involves sex, right? But it's not just about sex. Sexuality has to do with my relationship with myself, with my body, and with other people. So, the way I connect with myself is obviously going to affect how I connect with you. That's basic, let's say, and sexuality is about that. What happens is that it also involves our bodies, of course. So, at this moment, when I realize how little information I had, I start to open up about it with my friends, and I begin to realize that my friends have no idea about anything either. And then I say, hey, what's up, right? How can it be that we all have the same body? I mean, me with my friends, me with the guy, the same desires, and for no one to know anything, right? And not only that we lack information, but that there is also a veil of taboo, which in Sanskrit means sacred. Can you believe it? I didn't know that taboo was sacred. The term has been distorted to mean forbidden. Precious, of course, the sacred. So, there is something very sacred about knowing oneself, because if you know yourself, then the higher self comes in, or the one from above, which also applies, but the outside also comes in to tell you something, and you say, no, man, wait, I don't like that, I like this, and it gives you agency and it gives you power. Knowledge is power. So, it's a dialogue, of course, just like when we go to eat. What do you want to eat?
Churrasquito with salad, and I want a pasta, and well, the same here. What do you like? Do you want me to suck here? Do you want me to touch here?
And everything unspoken, right?
Yes, assuming that by a little moan you make more or less.
And it's uncomfortable too, right? Because I don't know what you like, and you can't tell me either. So I try things, and in the end, we weren't talking about anything. Why? Why can we talk about everything else?
This does not mean that we are talking about dirty talk. I mean the topic of. It's not the topic of something else you might like. It involves communication, getting to know each other, knowing oneself.
So as not to expose myself to awkward situations, right? Because, I mean, I go out for the first time with someone and I start talking, What things does she like? What is her favorite food? What does she enjoy doing? What does she do with her days? Right now, with that information, and without having any kind of information about what she likes sexually, we get along well. I mean, well, let's do it first time. I have no information what that person likes, and that person has no idea what I like. So we are going to find ourselves in a super vulnerable space as well. Because we are both naked in front of a person I don't know, all my ghosts, all their ghosts, and there is an emptiness. In the middle of this, there's a terrible discomfort. And it's a problem because I could ask him in that same meeting what he likes, whether he likes to hook up or not. How can we start to lift the weight of this so-called taboo, which clearly affects all of us? And as a sexologist, do you feel that men get intimidated by?
I assume you said men or partners. Do you feel like there is some intimacy because you are a sexologist? Oh, she knows.
Always. Do I really like that? I really like that because I always say it, right? The answer is always the same. So you enjoy sex and you must be really good at it, right? What does it mean to be good at it? Because you might like one thing and the other person might like something else. So I won't connect with you in the same way I can with the other person. It's about what I like, but not in the dialectic of the relationship and in the encounter between those people. It's the logo, it's the number 3, it's the relationship. It's not just what I like or what you like, but what we enjoy in the encounter. Of course, it won't be the same with another partner you have or someone else. It's clear that with you I can be amazing because, oh magic, we like the same things, and with the other person, maybe not. In the end, it's about what you like, where we meet, and what happens in that bond. Catita, I could go on for hours, but wait, so what does Aquilar mean? And let's go with You're My Coven. My Instagram is called aquilar.buenosaires. Visit it. And basically, what? The gatherings, or aqualives, were the meetings of witches and wizards from the old days, where they supposedly came together to worship the devil. In reality, there were generally women who gathered to share their experiences, to be in nature, to sing, and to dance. These gatherings included the yamanes and yamanas who faced social stigma because of their association with witchcraft. Witches had cats because they understood that keeping an environment free of rats created a healthier and more hygienic space. So the witch with the black cat was there to keep the rats away. Essentially, that aqualives were gatherings of witches and wizards during those times when it was said they worshipped the devil, but in truth, they were people coming together to debate, converse, share experiences, and perhaps even take mushrooms in nature, right? They were freer people, if we want to call it that, or they went against the hegemonic discourse of the time, for which they would burn you, right? As a witch, I then decided to give that flair to my project because what I do is, in addition to providing individual and couples therapy, organizing group meetings where we come together, women and men, to share our experiences and realize that what affects me also happens to others. And how I worked for a long time in psychology with therapeutic groups, and there is a certain magic in the group, in sharing. In the opening, in the connection, as social beings, there is something very magical about sharing with the other and starting to open up certain experiences, right? So, the gatherings are just that. They are spaces where we can start to open certain conversations and share with each other.
It's great among peers.
And peered.
You are a channel, but you don't impose your views. It's a space.
It is a space I enable that, a space. And the magic happens among the people who are there. After that, I do nothing. I simply enable that space, which we don't have many of. The reality is that there are many spaces where everyone can feel free to say and share.
I think it's something fantastic. We'll wrap it up here, Catita. We'll close here. Thank you for this opportunity. It was nothing. They are holding us back because we have to cut. If this continues, hopefully you'll invite me for another chapter. We can do round 2. Here it goes.
Thank you.
Let's finish with a hug. Thank you, dear. A final kiss. A hug. Thank you, dear. This was Metanoia Monomer, the era of integration. To learn more about this cycle and find out what's coming up, subscribe and hit the bell hard. Namaskar. Cheers and good luck.